Life swings like a pendulum, backward and forward between pain and boredom.
Do not mistake the pain for punishment. It is the proof that you are still alive. We live in an era obsessed with comfort. Every ad promises relief. Every scroll numbs discomfort. Every product is designed to take the edge off your pain. But behind the smiles and curated screens, there is a silent epidemic most people can't name. Suffering. Unspoken. Unseen. But ever present. We treat it like an error in the system. As something that shouldn't be there. As if the purpose of life is to feel good, and anything else is failure. But what if that assumption is precisely what's making us sick? What if pain is not the problem, but the portal? What if suffering isn't just a curse, but a teacher? And what if the man who stared deepest into this abyss, and came out not with false hope but raw clarity, was Arthur Schopenhauer? Because unlike the optimist who told us everything happens for a reason, Schopenhauer looked suffering in the eye and said, "To live is to suffer." Not as a metaphor, not as a phase, but as the very fabric of existence. And strangely, by doing so, he uncovered a strange kind of peace. This is not a video about avoiding suffering. This is a video about bearing it, with depth, with dignity, and perhaps even with a glimpse of transcendence. A man can do what he wills, but he cannot will what he wills. Arthur Schopenhauer. What if suffering is not your enemy, but your entrance? What if the pain you're trying to escape is the very thing that can set you free? There is a reason you feel like life is a burden. Not because you are broken, but because you are awake. And in a world obsessed with pleasure, comfort, and distraction, to feel deeply is an act of rebellion. Schopenhauer didn't sugarcoat life. He looked directly at its brutality, and found something profound. He didn't ask, "How can I be happy?" He asked something far more dangerous. How can I live, knowing that suffering is inevitable? This video is not about escaping pain. It's about understanding it, living with it, and, somehow, transcending it. Because the secret is not in avoiding the suffering. The secret is in learning how to carry it, without it crushing you. So let's begin. Not with a solution, but with a wound. From the moment we are born, suffering is a part of us. We cry before we speak. We ache before we understand. We lose before we ever learn to hold. And for Schopenhauer, this wasn't a glitch in the human experience. It was the core of it. To live is to will. To will is to want. To want is to lack. And to lack is to suffer. The human being is a wanting creature. Our very essence is desire. Not just for food, shelter, or survival, but for meaning, for connection, for permanence in a world that constantly shifts beneath us. But here's the trap. Every time we get what we want, the pleasure fades. The will moves on. Desire returns. And so the cycle repeats. Satisfaction is fleeting. Pain is persistent. The more you crave, the more you chase, the more you cling, the deeper your suffering becomes. We think suffering is a sign that something is wrong with us. But for Schopenhauer, it's simply the cost of being conscious. To be aware, to truly see the world as it is to suffer. Because life is filled with loss. People leave. Bodies fail. Dreams die. And all of it is inescapable. Yet instead of confronting this truth, modern culture sells us the fantasy of constant comfort. Happiness is marketed as a product. Pain is pathologized. And silence, the place where truth might emerge, is drowned in noise. We scroll through curated illusions of perfect lives, while quietly imploding inside. But deep down, something in you already knows. The pain you feel is not a problem to be solved. It is a truth to be faced. And that's why Schopenhauer's work hurts so much. Because it strips away our illusions. It tells you the truth you don't want to hear. There is no final escape. But paradoxically, it's in accepting that truth that you can begin to find peace. So what exactly is the structure of this suffering? To understand Schopenhauer's secret, we must first understand his diagnosis of the human condition, a condition he viewed as tragic, but not hopeless. At the center of Schopenhauer's philosophy lies one idea: the will. Not the willpower you use to resist cake, but the blind, unconscious force that drives all living things, from the smallest insect to the human spirit. The will is not rational. It does not seek truth or justice. It only seeks more life, more power, more sensation, more possession, more security. It wants, endlessly. And that's where suffering begins. Because once you are possessed by the will, you are never truly free. You're always reaching, always grasping, always running. Even from yourself. You desire love, and fear its loss. You desire success, and drown in anxiety over failure. You desire pleasure, and numb yourself to pain. Only to find that numbness becomes its own prison. The will creates illusion. The illusion that if you just had a little more, then you'd finally be at peace. But peace never comes. Because peace is not what the will wants. The will only wants wanting. This is the sickness. And yet, Schopenhauer was not a nihilist. He didn't believe life was meaningless. He believed that if we could step back, if we could see the will for what it is, we might begin to disarm it. This disarming doesn't happen through indulgence, or even through success. It happens through conscious awareness, through discipline, through aesthetic experience, compassion, and inner surrender. 1. Aesthetic experience, escaping the will through beauty. For Schopenhauer, art was not entertainment, it was salvation. When you lose yourself in a piece of music, when you are absorbed by a painting, when a poem or a landscape suspends your sense of self, you are no longer a willing creature. You become a witnessing one. The desire stops. The grasping ceases. For a moment, you are free from the will. Experiencing pure being, without hunger, without fear, without ego. And that stillness, that momentary transcendence, is not delusion. It is truth. It shows us what lies beyond suffering. Not the absence of pain, but the presence of something deeper. Peace. This is why Schopenhauer saw artists as spiritual beings. They don't escape life. They reveal its hidden dimension. They remind us that the soul does not need to consume in order to exist. It only needs to awaken. 2. Compassion, the only true moral principle. For all his pessimism, Schopenhauer believed deeply in compassion. Not as a duty. Not as a virtue signaling game. But as the only real evidence that we are more than animals driven by instinct. When you suffer, deeply, viscerally, and you witness someone else in pain, there is a moment of resonance. You recognize yourself in them. Their tears are yours. Their trembling is familiar. And in that shared vulnerability, the will temporarily dissolves. Because compassion doesn't come from the ego. It comes from the recognition that all egos are illusions. And here's the paradox. The more you understand your own suffering, the more you are able to suffer with others. And that shared pain becomes a bridge to something sacred. It's not that suffering disappears, but it transforms. From isolation into intimacy. From chaos into connection. 3. Resignation and inner freedom, the final surrender. Schopenhauer's greatest insight was perhaps his darkest. You cannot kill the will. But you can stop obeying it. This is what he called resignation, not in the sense of giving up, but in the sense of letting go. Letting go of the belief that life must always be pleasant. Letting go of the fantasy that you are in control. Letting go of the idea that your worth is measured by what you achieve. Real freedom begins when you stop fighting the nature of reality and start aligning with it. This isn't passivity. It's lucid acceptance. It is choosing consciousness over compulsion. And the reward is subtle, but profound. You become capable of enduring. Of standing still in the storm, not untouched. but unshaken at your core. As Schopenhauer wrote, "The greatest of follies is to sacrifice health for any other kind of happiness." He meant not just physical health, but psychological and spiritual health. Your peace cannot depend on endless victories. It must come from within the struggle itself. Transformation, turning suffering into strength. We've seen how Schopenhauer diagnosed suffering. We've seen how he mapped its anatomy. How it originates not from the world, but from the will within us that refuses to be still. But here's where everything turns. Suffering, if faced consciously, can transform us. It can crack the ego. It can break the illusion. And in doing so, it can reveal something far more powerful than comfort or pleasure. Character, integrity, inner strength. Suffering becomes meaningful not because it feels good, but because it forces you to see what matters. In the depths of pain, you learn to distinguish between what is real and what is illusion, between what is fleeting and what is eternal. This is what Schopenhauer called the redemption of the spirit through suffering. 1. The wisdom hidden in pain. Think about the moments that shaped you. Were they the easy ones? The comfortable ones? The days when everything went according to plan? No. Your greatest wisdom likely came in the aftermath of devastation. A heartbreak that left you raw. A failure that shattered your self-image. A loss that collapsed your sense of permanence. And what happened after? You learned. Not just about the world, but about yourself. You discovered limits you didn't know you had. You found silence where there was once noise. And in that silence, maybe, you glimpsed something sacred. Schopenhauer believed that suffering carves depth into the soul. Depth that can't be faked, bought, or borrowed. It must be endured. 2. The power of withdrawal, saying no to the world. To transform suffering, you must change your relationship to desire. Not repress it. Not indulge it. But understand it, and then transcend it. Schopenhauer admired the ascetics, not because they were holy, but because they had learned to say no to the will. To no longer chase every impulse. To resist the seduction of endless stimulation. To find joy in simplicity, and meaning in restraint. In a world that glorifies appetite, the act of withdrawal becomes a radical rebellion. It is not escapism. It is clarity. To stop reacting. To stop chasing. To stop believing that your life must be constantly moving forward to be valuable. In stillness, you reclaim your soul. 3. Detachment, loving without clinging. One of the most powerful transformations suffering offers is detachment. But let's be clear. Detachment is not coldness. It is not apathy. It is not emotional numbness. True detachment is this. I will love fully. I will feel deeply. I will give everything I have. But I will not cling. Because I know nothing is mine. Not this body. Not this relationship. Not this identity. Everything is passing through. Everything is borrowed. And that's not cause for despair. It's cause for reverence. You begin to treat life not as a possession, but as a gift. And when you do that, you suffer differently. You suffer consciously. And that consciousness frees you. 4. Finding meaning in the midst of pain. Schopenhauer believed that suffering is inevitable. But he also believed that we can meet it with dignity. Not by pretending it doesn't hurt. Not by covering it with affirmations. But by accepting it as part of life's fabric. This acceptance opens the door to meaning. Because once you stop asking, why me? You start asking, what now? What can this suffering teach me? What illusions is it stripping away? What parts of me are ready to die, so something deeper can be born? That shift, from victimhood to awareness, is everything. As Viktor Frankl later wrote, suffering ceases to be suffering the moment it finds a meaning. And Schopenhauer knew this. He saw that while you cannot avoid the storm, you can choose to sail through it awake. 5. Spiritual freedom, the final liberation. For Schopenhauer, the ultimate transformation lies in spiritual freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom from having to do anything at all to feel complete. This is a higher form of existence. One not driven by craving or fear, but by truth, beauty, and inner peace. You no longer define yourself by pleasure or status or victory. You are defined by being. And this being is enough. It is the sacred center beneath all experience. The part of you that has always been there. Watching, witnessing, waiting for you to remember. When suffering is met with awareness, it becomes initiation. A rite of passage into a deeper self. A descent that births awakening. The art of living with suffering. At this point, you may be asking, if suffering is so inevitable, if the will never ceases, and if pleasure is always followed by pain, what's the point? Why live at all? And this is precisely where Schopenhauer's genius reaches its peak. Because he doesn't leave us in despair. Instead, he offers a radical kind of hope. Not a sugary optimism, but a deep, sobering form of transcendence. Not the kind that escapes the world, but the kind that allows you to live in it without being consumed by it. Let's explore what it means to transcend suffering. Not by denying it, but by living with it in a way that makes you unbreakable. 1. The freedom of expecting nothing. Schopenhauer's first lesson in transcendence is simple, but brutal. Lower your expectations. We suffer most not from what happens, but from what we expect it to happen. From the stories we wrote in our heads about how life should be. What if, instead of asking life to meet your fantasies, you asked yourself to meet life as it is? This doesn't mean apathy. It means presence. It means giving up the illusion that the world owes you happiness, and instead, discovering joy and acceptance. To be surprised by beauty, rather than demanding it. To be grateful for the moment, not entitled to the outcome. When you expect nothing, everything becomes a gift. And this shift in perception is liberation. 2. The sublime, beauty is salvation. Though often seen as a pessimist, Schopenhauer had a poetic side. He believed that while suffering cannot be erased, it can be transcended. Through aesthetic experience. What does that mean? It means beauty, true beauty, can pull us outside of ourselves. Out of the grip of the will. Out of our cravings, our obsessions, our petty desires. A piece of music. A poem. A landscape. A moment of silence in nature. These things don't solve our problems. But for a fleeting moment, they free us from being a problem. They dissolve the ego. They remind us that we are part of something larger. This is the sublime. Not pleasure, not distraction, but spiritual contact with the eternal. Schopenhauer believed this was one of the purest experiences of freedom a human can have. Because in that moment, you are not chasing anything. You are simply awake. 3. Compassion, the birth of meaning through shared pain. One of the most radical byproducts of suffering is compassion. When you've known despair, you become capable of recognizing it in others. You become less judgmental, less arrogant, less obsessed with winning, and more present. This is why Schopenhauer placed ethics at the center of transcendence. Not because it's morally right, but because it frees us from the prison of self. The more we focus on serving others, the less we are consumed by our own endless cravings. Helping someone else doesn't just ease their pain. It eases yours, too. Because in that act of compassion, you temporarily dissolve the boundaries of your ego. And that, Schopenhauer believed, is the closest thing to peace. 4. Living a life of stillness in a world of noise. The modern world is not designed for transcendence. It is designed to keep you busy. Addicted, distracted. To transcend suffering today, you must become something rare. A still soul in a chaotic world. This means learning to sit with yourself. To breathe through the anxiety. To listen to your thoughts without believing them. It means building a life not around stimulation, but around silence, space, and meaning. To say no to what doesn't nourish you. To stop performing and start being. This path is not glamorous. It won't get you applause. But it might get you freedom. And Schopenhauer would argue. That is the only thing worth having. 5. You are not your pain, discovering the observer. There is a final layer to Schopenhauer's transcendence. A truth that echoes through mysticism, psychology, and philosophy. You are not your pain. Yes, you feel it. Yes, it shapes you. But deep beneath the surface, there is something in you that witnesses it. A presence that is not the will. Not the craving. Not the suffering. But the observer. The one who watches the storm without being the storm. The one who hurts, but does not collapse into the hurt. The one who can stand in the fire, and remain whole. This part of you cannot be broken. And perhaps, that is the secret Schopenhauer gave us without saying it outright. Suffering does not destroy you. It burns away what is false. Until only the real remains. And what is real is indestructible. The beauty of the broken. So what is Schopenhauer's secret to bearing suffering? It is not found in escaping it, or denying it, or solving it. It is found in becoming someone who can hold it. With clarity. With compassion. With courage. To suffer, and still create beauty. To ache, and still offer kindness. To be cracked, and still let the light in. This is not weakness. This is strength of the highest order. This is transcendence. So if you're suffering, don't run. Lean in. Listen. Let it shape you. Let it strip away what you're not. So you can finally meet who you really are. Because sometimes, the only way out of pain is through it. And if you walk it consciously, you won't just survive it. You will become something unbreakable.